want to start this episode with a little exercise. Visualization, if you will. We want you to think about what home means. Take a second. What comes to mind? Maybe it's a physical place, maybe it's a specific person, or maybe it's a feeling.
Now, how would you feel if home was literally torn down under the promise that something big would come that could change the economy of an entire city? But then, that thing never materialized, and what's left of home is pavement. Empty lots and warehouses. This is what happened to Alana Marie, a local filmmaker's family, and thousands of other Black residents in a small municipality in North St. Louis County called Kinloch.
The development corporation takes up about a third of the city.
Alana is standing in the parking lot of a local grocery store's warehouse. This is where her grandparents' home once stood.
8449 Scudder and Jackson, which is now whatever the address is for the warehouse.
Kinloch was the first Black community in Missouri to incorporate and officially become its own town. And for 40 years, it flourished.
So you left your door unlocked for people to come in. It was safe, and you knew your neighbor.
But today, it's a shell of its former self. And for the past 2 years, Alana has spent her time trying to preserve what's left of Kinloch's legacy.
Your house is not there. Your school is not there. Your church is not there. And as you get older, people age, people pass away, and so it is. I can only imagine how traumatic that is to drive by now and you see a huge building from where you used to lay your head.
So in this episode, we tell you the story of a place that growing up in St. Louis, my family used to call the Black Mecca.
And how Alana is working to preserve the legacy of the first all-Black town in Missouri. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here, a show for people somewhere on the woke spectrum.
To understand the story of Kinloch, you need to start with the Great Migration. From around 1910 to 1970, millions of Black Americans fled the horrific conditions of the South for an uncertain future in the North.
And as Black people traveled to northern cities, all Black neighborhoods started to get overcrowded, which limited the number of places they could live. Kinloch was one of those places.
And the Blacks that were in Kinloch were servants to the white families in both Kinloch and Ferguson. Ferguson was primarily white, and it was a sundown town, meaning Blacks who lived in the city of Kinloch and who worked in the city of Ferguson could only be in Ferguson in the daytime. So once your shift ended or whatever business dealings you had in the city of Ferguson, once you see that sun start to come down, you best be on your way back to Kinloch or wherever else you were living at that time.
An electric streetcar line ran through Kinloch, connecting it to neighboring suburbs like Ferguson, and bus transfers could take you all over St. Louis.
Realtors saw an opportunity to profit. They bought land to create South Kinloch Park, a suburb meant exclusively for Black people. But first, they sold the lots to white people, who then sold the land to Black people at twice the price, which allowed them to profit from laws that prevented Black people from buying property in white areas or even obtaining home loans. We asked St. Louis Public Radio political reporter Jason Rosenbaum to read us the lead of a St. Louis Post-Dispatch story published in January of 1917.
While segregation of Negroes in St. Louis is restrained by a temporary injunction in the United States District Court and the question is pending in the United States Supreme Court, it is being exploited in St. Louis County by a real estate company which is selling lots to Negroes in South Kinloch Park at double the price quoted to white investors.
And as the population of Black people grew, so did their need for schools. In Kinloch, Black children attended primary schools separately from white children.
At first, there were no high schools in Kinloch, so white students went to all-white high schools 3 to 6 miles away, and Black students went to all-Black high schools 10 to 12 miles away. But this depended on Kinloch School District paying tuition for those students, which it couldn't always afford.
And the desire to keep schools segregated would become a big factor in Kinloch's development. With a narrow majority, Black people elected Reverend Walter Johnson, the first Black school board member on a 3-member Kinloch school board in 1924.
They threatened to elect another Black school board member, and the white people were upset. Not only that, but they were upset that they did not want their kids going to school with Black residents of Kinloch.
On April 12, 1937, they gathered over 300 white children to protest. Their signs read, "We want our taxes for our school and we want separation of our schools." They tried 3 times to divide the school district, but they couldn't overpower the Black vote.
At the time, Missouri law made it super easy to create a new town.
And so essentially, they created the city of Berkeley. And I always say that literally the only reason the city of Berkeley was created is because white folk didn't want to go to school with Black folk. The first thing that the residents of this newly established city of Berkeley did was create their own school district.
When the Berkeley School District was created for white children, it had half as many students and twice as much money. Yet, residents in what became the all-Black Kinloch School District banded together to make do with what they had.
They basically didn't have a lot of money for their books or books to take home, but they had highly qualified educators. And one thing that Kinlochians are very proud of is how they were able to make do with the less that they had.
But without funding, it simply wasn't sustainable. Remember, at the time, it was pretty easy to create new towns in Missouri. So the Black residents of Kinloch decided they should create their own municipality, elect their own officials, raise their own taxes, and fund their own schools. And in 1948, Kinloch was incorporated as its own self-sustaining town with a population of a little under 6,000 people.
And they literally had everything they needed in that one zip code. So they had their own grocery stores, their own mom and pop shops, libraries, the YMCA, community centers, their own post office, their own movie theater. They literally had everything but a bank.
It was during this period that Alana's family history got woven into the story of Kinloch.
My grandfather, Richard Bryant Flowers Sr., moved to the city of Kinloch from small town Covington, Tennessee in his late teens, early 20s. And story has it that he had a thing for white women. And because he had a thing for white women, his life was threatened and essentially told him, if you don't leave the city, you won't have a life. Eventually, my grandfather's parents, my great-grandparents, migrated up to Kinloch from Covington, Tennessee as well.
At the heart of the growing community were the schools and the ability to raise and teach children in a self-sustaining community. And for decades, the town flourished, growing to a population of roughly 10,000 residents.
But a cornerstone of the community, schools, would erode in the mid-1970s.
They said it was segregated, there was too many Black kids in here, and so they dissolved Kinloch School District and they were forced to merge with Ferguson-Florissant School District as well as Berkeley School District. So both the kids of Berkeley and the kids of Kinloch would be bussed out to Ferguson-Florissant.
In 1975, the Kinloch School District was no more. With the 3-district merger, many Kinloch residents not only lost a cornerstone of their community, they also lost the sense that their children would be treated fairly when being educated in the new school system. And soon, the community would face a challenge it would never recover from. Kinloch is located right next to Lambert Field, St. Louis's airport.
You have direct access to all 3 major highways, to 70, to 170, to 270. You could essentially walk to the airport to travel.
And in the early 80s, civic leaders wanted to expand the airport's footprint.
The plan was to turn it into a global hub for trade and travel. On the pretext of local Federal Aviation Administration mandates, they initiated a noise abatement program.
But how they carved it it was Ferguson and Berkeley. No home in Kinloch was a part of the noise abatement program. The only option that Kinloch residents had was to get bought out.
Even though Kinloch was a community with hundreds of homes and families, officials zoned it non-residential and offered buyouts to residents, who, again, were not offered any kind of noise reduction for increased air traffic.
And so those families were propositioned with a buyout to either A, move to the northeastern quadrant of the city where other homes were built if they wanted to remain, but those homes were limited, or B, you could live somewhere else in St. Louis, many of which moved to surrounding municipalities like Ferguson or Florissant or Hazelwood or Delwood or any of the other 80-plus municipalities in St. Louis County.
The St. Louis Airport Authority kept buying up homes to make the runway bigger and bigger.
Alana's grandparents were among the last holdouts.
I remember my father telling me that when he would go over there, that my grandfather would be, at the kitchen table, with his fist balled up, just pissed that, I'm not leaving. This is my house. I paid for it. I raised my kids here. I'm not leaving. You're going to have to bring in a wrecking ball, and the wrecking ball is going to have to move me out of this home.
Because the airport is owned and operated by the city of St. Louis, officials could use eminent domain to force people out of their homes.
Once it got word that my grandparents didn't have any other option, you're going to have to leave and the house will be taken away. I remember my father saying him and his siblings were going to all go back to the house where the foundation was, and they would all take a brick or some memorabilia from the house that they can keep, as a keepsake.
1 week later, they went back to the house.
Nothing was left. It was just flat land, and that's how fast that happened, and they weren't able to take anything with them.
The plans to expand the airport and make it a major hub fell through, but it was too late for Kinloch. In the 2 decades following the buyout, Kinloch's population would decline to a tenth of its original size.
Today, it has a population of under 300 residents. It's become a dumping ground for people to get rid of old mattresses, tires, furniture, you name it. Nature has started to take over, with overgrown foliage standing tall amidst burnt-out buildings.
Now, there's serious talk of privatizing the airport, and that effort is backed in part by Rex Sinkfield, the index fund pioneer and tax cut proponent who funded Better Together from our first episode, At the Table and Dismissed. But Rex wasn't the only one. Several other people who were involved with Better Together have been pushing for the airport to be privatized.
And in the midst of all this, Alana's doing everything she can to make sure that Kinloch is not forgotten.
A few years ago, Alana was pursuing a Master of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis when she decided to take a course about historically Black communities in the St. Louis region. And for the course, they toured historically Black communities.
Through Mill Creek Valley, Wellston, the old Pruitt-Igoe site, and of course, Kinloch.
After her grandparents' home was torn down, Alana's father didn't really talk about growing up in Kinloch.
But during the tour, they stopped near an open field, shaded with several large trees.
And to my left, I saw 3 older men sitting in an open space in the city of Kinloch. They were just sitting there, fellowshipping in a circle, sitting in lawn chairs, and drinking beer, cans of Stag. And that imagery reminded me of backyard holiday parties at my grandmother's house with my grandfather and my uncles and my dad. I've seen that picture before. So to see that again with men who I had no idea who they were, but it felt very much like family. How did it get to be this way? Who were those men sitting there? How many people still live in this space? And I tried to do some research. As a visual learner, I try to find videos and other things that help show the subject or what it is that I'm researching, and I couldn't find anything on the city of Kinloch. And I remember posting the question on Facebook saying, why isn't there a documentary about Kinloch? And a dear friend of mine commented and said, why don't you just make one? And my response was, okay.
She turned to YouTube and began teaching herself the basics of videography. And she gathered her father and several of his friends for her first interview in Kinloch Park.
Planes are flying every 5 minutes. The wind is just blowing extremely loud. So long story short, it's footage I can't use now. But it's an experience that I needed to have in order to get to where I am now, because I do better learning in the moment. I learn by doing.
Even though the interview didn't quite go as planned, she knew she was onto something.
So Alana enrolled in a film production program through Continuity, a St. Louis-based nonprofit that aims to expand diversity in media production.
I had the opportunity to get selected to be a part of the inaugural class in 2017-2018, and that's where I really got the hands-on training for filmmaking.
For 36 weeks, she met once a week with fellow participants and mentors, and she supplemented the in-person learning with self-guided lessons at home. The program stretched her in ways that she never imagined, and she realized that the technical aspects of production were far more challenging than she expected. So she began applying for grants to hire others to assist with the project.
But the competitor in me wants to know what every button does on my camera. So I know what I'm looking at, and I know how to guide direction for the person who will be holding that position for further projects.
Alana's approach to the Kinloch doc is so hands-on, in part because of what's at stake.
This was her chance to unfold the story about her bloodline and ensure that the legacy of Missouri's first all-black city would never be forgotten. But gaining the trust of residents wasn't easy.
Knowing what the media has done to the city of Kinloch, there's a lot of reservations, there's a lot of hesitation. So many of those months without me having a camera in my hand, I spent learning people, I spent calling people.
Alana was hitting dead ends, and then she asked her aunt for help.
She did a lot of calling people on my behalf to say, this is my niece, expect a phone call from her. And people have welcomed me off the strength of my last name. My maiden name is Flowers, by the way. And so what I found is when I introduce myself, or I don't even have to introduce myself, people will look at me and say, "You were Flowers, ain't you?"
As she built trust with current and past residents, she began collecting interviews. Through a slow, deliberate process, Alana has started piecing together a mosaic that paints both the promise of Kinloch and the pain of watching the town's decline.
But for current Kinloch City Manager, Justine Blue, Kinloch is part of a destructive pattern that has wiped black communities off the map. Here's a clip from the documentary.
You destroy my schools, you buy my land, you prevent me from building houses, you do everything that you can to undermine my success. You only report the negative narratives about my community. You keep your foot on my neck, hoping to strangle the life out of me so that what? You can eventually gentrify my neighborhood. That's been the plan since the very beginning, if you ask me.
And part of explaining that history of destruction is letting people witness Kinloch's promise and pain for themselves.
There's a lot of y'all.
So Alana started offering tours of the city her family once called home.
I am well. My name is Alana Marie.
Attendance was small at first,
but word is starting to spread. And recently, she and her father led their biggest group yet, around 40 undergraduate students who are part of a service learning program based in St. Louis.
The homework assignment that I have for you is to do more research on your place of origin, to see a little bit of history about what was it like before you were born in that space.
Alana and her dad take the students to the Kinloch Walk of Fame and begin running down a list of famous former residents.
The first black mayor in the state of Missouri, Auntie Maxine.
Wait, I'm gonna take a picture.
Jennifer Lewis. In fact, Jennifer Lewis's mom, Dorothy, and my grandmother, Pauline, were like this. They were like this. Both have gone.
While most of Kinloch has been paved over or fallen into disrepair, the sense of community remains intact.
Alana leads students to the Kinloch Fire Department, housed in a small garage. They're greeted by Chief Kevin Stewart.
Welcome to the Kinloch Fire Protection District. This is our home for now. We're in the process of trying to get some things together to get a new station built. In the process of purchasing a new fire truck as well, in addition to this one, so we'll have 2 trucks instead of just one.
The Kinloch Fire Department, including the chief, is entirely run by volunteers. And even though Chief Stewart says they plan to bring on paid staff, the tradition of volunteer firefighters will remain intact.
Anybody you ask that knows anything about Kinloch and the fire department, every young black male was proud of a member of this fire department. We are truly a community who believed in taking care of our own and supporting one another, and that's exactly what they did. And that's why this fire district is still here. I mean, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into taking care of this community.
This is the story of Kinloch that Alana plans to bring to wider audiences with the Kinloch Doc, a story of pride and resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Here's a little snippet from the trailer.
And we're trying to rebuild the city from this rubble that was left behind, but this is home. It always has been, it always will be, no matter what.
I would love to use the film as an educational component to take it around the country so other people can see this film and identify with it and say, I grew up in a city like that, or my city is going through that very same thing right now, but you have time and resources to stop that from happening. I want people within my age frame, millennials, to understand their lineage and understand where they come from so they can have a better awareness of their own identity, the struggles that our parents and grandparents went through to establish any type of ownership so they will have the opportunity to pass it down to their kids.
Making the Kinloch Doc has been more challenging and fulfilling than Alana has expected.
But she presses on, motivated to keep a promise she wrote in a letter to her daughter.
Dear Addison, we've had many conversations over the course of your 10 years on this earth. We've talked generally about the history of Black people in America, from slavery to the criminal justice system, and specifically about your elders that paved the way for you to live comfortably. For the past 2 years, you've watched me on this quest to learn about my family and where we came from. You've seen me dig through old photo albums, and you always ask me, who is that, knowing I'm trying to figure out that very question. You've sat back in my editing room, watching me put clips together to tell the story about the city of Kinloch and what it means to me as a descendant. You've rode with me on several occasions to Kinloch and seen the despair in the city, and you've seen the despair on my face. You've come to be Mommy's mascot, telling everyone that your mom is a famous movie maker. Not quite, but I appreciate you speaking into my future. You have the general idea down when someone asks you, what does your mom do? In your eyes, I want to put Kinloch back together and want to help save this place from people coming to build things on it because this is where your papa used to live and it means a lot to me.
This show is produced by me, Jalian.
And me, Ashley Renee. Lauren Brown is our associate producer.
Much of the research for this episode was based on the book Kinloch, Missouri's First Black City, written by John A. Wright Sr. We highly recommend it as a resource for learning more. And we were grateful to be able to tap into audio that Alana Marie has collected for the Kinloch Doc.
Our show is overseen by Tim Lloyd, senior producer of On-Demand and Content Partnerships, and Robert Peterson, the director of radio programming and operations. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From PRX.